On this week's episode of Faith versus Culture, we're talking about the dangerous increase in Holocaust denial. That's coming up.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, welcome to this week's episode of Faith versus Culture. I'm joined by Billy Hallowell and our managing editor over at CBN Digital and FaithWire, Dan Andros. Guys, how you doing today?
Doing great.
Well, it's good to have you, and it's good to talk about this topic because I think it's something that is unfortunately increasing a lot in our culture, especially since the October 7th attack by Hamas against Israel, and that is Holocaust denial. It's something that in 2024 I didn't think we would still be talking about as much as we are, but unfortunately we are. And I think just to give some context to this conversation, one of the reasons among many that it matters so much is I was just looking at some numbers, and there are 147,000 plus Holocaust survivors, and that is direct Holocaust survivors, and then also people who dealt with the ramifications of the Holocaust, who currently live in Israel right now, which, as we just said, was just attacked on October 7th. In one day, that was the deadliest attack of Jewish people, the largest number of Jewish people who have died since the Holocaust. So this is something that's important to talk about, and it's not going away either. With college campuses, so many pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas rallies happening on college campuses around the country. Why do you think this is happening the way it is when we have so much access to information? It just seems kind of counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, I think part of it, Trey, at least, I think it's a pretty big mix of reasons why, if you actually look at it. But I think one of them is just a complete lack of trust in media. And then you combine that with a lot of indoctrination that's happening. I mean, we saw almost immediately after, within just a few days of the October 7th attacks, you had people standing up and defending Hamas. And then you'd see them get interviewed on the street. And I saw people saying, well, they were questioned, well, what about these videos showing that? And they're like, I don't believe those. And I mean, we're living in a post-truth world here, and the distrust in the media is so high, and that has ramifications on all spectrums and all beliefs. And I think one of them is on something like this. People that maybe are anti-Israel for whatever reason, they look at that and then they just go, I don't believe it. So that's, I think, one factor. But when it comes to the Holocaust, there's a whole nother level to this, just because it's something that has been, it predates the technology that we have right now and the super distrust of the media, right? The Holocaust deniers have been around, and the anti-Semitism has been around. So that part of it's nothing new. I think it's just heightened now.
Yeah, I think that I agree with everything you said. I'm going to give the super theological answer, though, that I think a lot of us, it's really easy. We get stuck in sort of the temporal, right? What is happening right before us. There is a whole spiritual dimension to this. I mean, what other group of people throughout the history of humanity have gone through the same thing again and again and again, from Esther and Haman down the line to the Holocaust? There's something spiritual going on, and I think it's all coalescing. The media bias, all of these things, where there is just an irrational hatred of the Jewish people, of Israel, that has always existed among some cohorts, and that we are watching it rear its ugly head again. Just 75 years after millions of Jewish people were exterminated and murdered by Hitler, here we are again. It's the same game plan. Get rid of the Jews. They don't deserve to be in the land. We're hearing this parallel language. I think where it becomes very troubling, to your point, Dan, is that spiritual dimension is colliding with higher education institutes, with the media, with Hollywood, with all of these places where the truth is not being given. And when you mix that spiritual issue with a lack of truth, you have substantial portions of young people who aren't only ignorant, it's actually scary and dangerous how ignorant they are, denying that these things that we know have happened, including Hamas's attack.
Yeah, for sure. I think this spiritual blindness is a necessary component, but also to your point, Dan, and you mentioned this too, Billy, I think you couple that with the fact that so much of our media, I think, is pushing narratives that are a different agenda, right, than what the truth is, which is obviously that the Holocaust happened. And there are not people in the media saying necessarily that the Holocaust didn't happen, but there are people on the far left who are in these higher education institutions that are saying it repeatedly. And we have instances of college campuses where this kind of denial is more widespread, where they have access to all kinds of educational information, of course. And that's where the misinformation seems to be flourishing the most. I was just looking at some other numbers. So this is a survey from last year, found that in the Netherlands, which is the home of Anne Frank, there's a, quote, disturbing lack of awareness about the Holocaust, with 23% of adults under 40 believing it's a myth. And then a more recent survey here in the United States that we've covered at FaithWire and CBN found that 20% of Americans between ages 18 and 29, that's about 1 in 5 younger Americans, also believe the Holocaust is a myth. That same study showed that many younger Americans believe, quote, Israel exploits the Holocaust victimhood for its own purposes, that people, quote, should boycott Israeli goods and products, and that Jews, quote, have too much power in America. And I think a lot of that is, unfortunately, this spiritual darkness, and then Satan is the prince and power of the air, and I think he uses a lot of the secular resources in the world to his advantage, right? I think there's a lot of misinformation happening, coming from absolutely anywhere and everywhere, and I think when there is not clarity, and there's the spiritual darkness that we're dealing with, I think we're pressed up against a wall. This kind of evil, denying the Holocaust is bound to happen.
And you see similar things with the denying of 9/11. And now, I mean, we just covered the Osama bin Laden letter that came out, and someone published that, and then you had all these people on TikTok going, wow, I didn't know about all the evil things that America did to deserve 9/11, and you're just like left scratching your head. I mean, that was only 20 years ago, and this is happening. And, to your point, Billy, about how against all odds, right? This is this little country that reemerges. All these countries, these Arab countries, want to annihilate them and wipe them off the map, yet somehow they keep surviving all of these attacks. And it's almost comical if it weren't so sad when you're reading those comments, Trey, about how the Jews have too much power and things like that. It's a laughable claim when you look at the size of this country and the number of people that they have compared to the rest of the world, these other nations around them. How are they the oppressor? How are they oppressing anyone? And they're just trying to survive. And so the claims are laughable on their face, but like you said, I mean, there's a spiritual battle going on here.
Yeah, and it's compounded again, when you have, and this is why, we talk about a lot of different things. Everybody out there in the media, this is one of the biggest dangers to America right now. Fill in the blank. I'm not even going to bring the issues up. All these things that are so dangerous. One of the biggest dangers to humanity and to American culture is the bias that has gone on for decades in the media and all these different locations, where it actually colors and changes the way that people perceive realities happening before them. And in this case, to see evidence in video of what Hamas did and to walk away. And we even have survey data from the West Bank and Gaza showing that the people there do not believe that these things happened either. This is incredibly pervasive, especially here in this country. And it really makes me wonder, what do we need to do as a culture to save our young people? Because 5 in 10 of them, half of young people, 18 to 29, are confused about what they believe when it comes to the Holocaust being a myth or not.
Yeah, which that's a scary number in and of itself, that people are that confused about something that there is so much evidence for, there's so much history for. We've talked about this. There's obvious truth to it when you look at, as you said, Dan, Israel is this tiny little country that has perpetually been fighting for just their right to exist since they began to exist as a country, which they're not that old as a country, by the way, either. So yeah, this is such an important topic. I'm glad glad we're talking about it. And we're going to take a quick break. But on the other side, I want to talk about some of the celebrities, public figures who have been speaking out what they're saying and the pushback, unfortunately, that many of them are facing because of it. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Faith versus Culture. I'm joined by Billy Hallowell and Dan Andros. We're talking about Holocaust denial, which is a growing issue in Western culture, really culture generally right now since the October 7th attack by Hamas against Israel. But there are celebrities who are speaking out, some in support of Israel, obviously, and some against. A more recent one is actually Friends star David Schwimmer. He recently condemned those who are denying the fact that Hamas committed just sexual atrocities, sex crimes against the Jewish people, against many Jewish people during the attack on October 7th. He said, "Why do so many refuse to believe, despite all the evidence on camera and in testimony, the women and children and men who were brutally assaulted by terrorists on October 7th?" There have been several other stars that we can talk about who have spoken out in support of Israel, but many are facing a lot of pushback too. I know Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman star, she actually screened a lot of the IDF, their video footage of Hamas. She screened that in Hollywood with several other celebrities, and she was ironically criticized for being insensitive, for airing what Hamas was doing to Israel. So it's important to have people speaking out, though.
Yeah, and David Schwimmer is an interesting one. I mean, he's obviously a very big name, but he is also an advocate for some of his other, cultural issues that he pushes. He's an advocate for rape survivors. And so I think he was particularly perplexed at why, because I'm sure he gets a lot of support on that issue in Hollywood. Yeah. And then you had this just mountain of evidence, video evidence and eyewitness evidence of what happened on October 7th, as far as not only the murders, but the sexual rape and torture before these murders, which were horrific. The New York Times actually did a really good job and a very extensive report in which they went to great lengths to try to confirm all of these accounts and review these videos and the video evidence. And some of the things they watched in there, I wouldn't even recommend reading this whole article, because it's picture the worst horror movie you could possibly imagine, and then go 10 times worse than that. And that's what they were doing as far as these sexual assaults before and torture before they murdered these innocent Israelis. And so David Schwimmer's talking about that. He's saying, how can you not believe it? We have all of this evidence here. What are you doing? How can you not believe it? And I think you talk a lot when you see on the Oscars and these shows, which I haven't watched in years, by the way, but you see them talk about bravery and courage. Well, I got to say, for people like David Schwimmer, who are, Hollywood stars, for them to speak out on this and kind of call people out and say, what are you doing? I think that's a sign of courage. And I'm glad people like him are speaking out and kind of holding people accountable and saying, come on, like, the evidence is there. What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, you have an ideological problem and that there's something deeper going on when there's very clear, as we've said, evidence. We know this happened. Even if you don't agree with how Israel and Palestine have interacted or what's going on there, if you have a historic issue with what has gone on, and I'm not endorsing that, I'm just saying, even if you're in that camp and you don't love Israel or like Israel, why would you not be able to say, oh my goodness, what happened here was otherworldly, inhuman, and horrific? It's bizarre. And that's how you know it's a spiritual issue, that some people cannot bring themselves to even do that. That's not a high bar to reach. This should be pretty easy to say, those crimes are not normal. That is not how wars are fought. This is a completely abnormal, evil thing. And I will say, to your point, Dan, in an era where misgendering somebody, making a mistake, can lead to a total cancellation, right? Yeah. Your career could be over. It doesn't matter whether you're a big star or a small star. It is incredibly brave, knowing what is at stake, knowing how many people are angry, not just angry and taking to the streets, which is fine. We have the right to protest, but might get violent over something like this. It is incredibly brave of these celebrities to do the right thing and to speak the truth rather than cowering and being silent on something that is this important.
Well, yeah, and I just want to add to that, Billy. I mean, we're talking about Holocaust denial and these numbers, Trey, that you are bringing up. And when you deny basic facts that are happening here that we have video evidence for, you're going down the same road again. You're doing it all over again, like this Holocaust denial, and you're sort of re-traumatizing all the Jewish people on this by denying this thing that just happened. This isn't even a half a century ago, where so many people that are alive today weren't even born when the Holocaust happened. So you could at least say, well, it wasn't in the news, and they didn't even know about it, and people aren't teaching it now. This just happened on October 7th. Like, you have no excuse, and there's already denials happening. It's very, very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, not only are there denials, but then there's also this moral equivalency, right? That if I'm supporting, or if I'm saying what Hamas did was wrong, that somehow is supporting anything and everything that the Israeli government has ever done. Like, I think it's fine. I know it's kind of tricky waters, but it's okay to be like, I think the Israeli government maybe handled this wrong. Have that conversation. That is fine. Like, do whatever you want to when it comes to that. But it should not be a brave thing to say what Hamas did is evil. Like, it's right. That's I'm not saying anything else. I am just saying that what Hamas did is absolutely unconscionably evil. That should be an easy thing to say, but unfortunately, it's become a really controversial thing to say. And the people, to your point, Dan, who do end up speaking out in support of Israel after this attack by Hamas, they are brave, but they really shouldn't. It shouldn't be considered bravery.
Right.
We shouldn't live in a world where that is brave for you just to say evil is evil. What a sad world that's the reality that we're living with right now.
Well, and I'll just respond to that and just say that's kind of what I mean by courage. Like, it's not courage like you're going to secure a hill in battle, but you are risking something. You know that if you're in Hollywood, that these are far left liberals for the most part who are going to come down on anything that is remotely perceived as the opposite end of the political spectrum from that point of view. And so any support for Israel, I think she wrote, like you said, support it, like we're going to stand with Israel on this. Like, why should it be controversial to say we stand with a country that just had this horrible thing happen to them, right? Everyone stood with America after 9/11. You stand with any country and the innocent people that live in these countries when they're attacked. And yet the political biases are so ingrained in Hollywood that they got to take something like that down. That's just, so it shouldn't be considered something brave, but at the same time, I do think they are risking at least some status of just jobs, or maybe their position in the industry, by taking a stand when they could just stay silent.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, in all of this, we need to be remembering to pray for everybody involved in this, including people in Gaza, people in the West Bank, people who are out there, 2 in 10. I have to say these numbers again, 2 in 10 of 18 to 29-year-olds in America who do not believe that the Holocaust happened. They think it's a myth. And the other 30% who are confused, praying for clarity, praying for those who are facing difficult circumstances in the middle of this war on all sides of it. That's an important reminder, I think, for us at this juncture to remember.
Yeah, and I think another prayer that I'll add to that, Billy, is for our hearts, not just to pray, but for our hearts not to grow cold, because, I look at this story and I'm frustrated at some of the propaganda I see, coming out against Israel. That doesn't mean I think everything Israel does is right, but at the same time, there's just so much anti-Israel, so much anti-Semitism out there. I get frustrated at it. Now, the caution for that side of things is not to have your heart grow cold for those who are caught in the middle of this in Gaza, right? Innocent people that are there. Even if they have views that disagree with me, if they're not a terrorist and they're not actively fighting and they're not doing all this stuff, like, I need to pray for those people in the midst of that and not let my heart grow cold to that situation.
Yeah, for sure. I think these are important prayer points and things that we can definitely be thinking about and carry with us as we think about Israel and Hamas and of course this growing Holocaust denial. So we're going to fit in a quick break right here, and we'll be right back in just a minute with more Faith versus Culture to wrap up this episode. Welcome back to this episode of Faith versus Culture. I think this is such a sensitive topic, but an important one. And we were just talking about some prayer points that we can have going into thinking about and praying for Israel and praying for the Jewish people. And I think with so many different media outlets and agendas vying for our attention. And then on top of that, having the spiritual warfare that I think we're all dealing with. There's a spiritual darkness in the world that you were talking about earlier in this episode, Billy. I think just praying for wisdom in how we handle this information that's coming at us. We're drinking from a fire hydrant when it comes to information. And so often it's misinformation that's mixed in with the truth. So I think for me, that's the takeaway is let me be a wise steward of the information I have access to when it comes to this issue in particular.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's just imparting this history on the next generation and people in my circle. When I was growing up in 8th grade, we had a Holocaust survivor come speak to us, and that was very impactful. And I think given how many people don't know and are forgetting or not learning this about the Holocaust and what happened here, it's incumbent on us to teach and to share this and to bring this information to the next generation. Because if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. It's the old axiom, but it's so true. And we're seeing that play out, unfortunately, in certain ways. So I think it's just a reminder here that we need to just not call on other people to do it. We have to do it ourselves if we want it to get done.
Yeah, and I'll just say, be discerning. At the end of the day, when it comes to information, we're not called to our own whims, our own thoughts, our own biases to only seek information that backs those things. We're called to truth, right? And the truth means admitting and understanding what is going on around us. And so I'll just leave it there. I think we have to be making sure that not only do we understand the information, that we're conveying it properly, as you were saying, Dan, not only to the next generation, but to everybody around today, even in older generations who some of them seem very confused about the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, stick with us. We are going to be right back after this quick break to wrap up this episode of Faith versus Culture. Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News channel. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't already, head over to cbnnews.com, faithwire.com, and you can subscribe to our Quick Start newsletter. And you can also check out our daily Quick Start podcast Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. Don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching this